Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in Montgomery history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time you are listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing to what places and at what moments of day or night these documented accounts reach. In 1859, the city of Montgomery, Alabama, stood as a testament to the peculiar institution that would soon tear the nation apart. The cotton fields stretched endlessly beyond the city limits, and the Alabama River carried both commerce and secrets downstream. It was in this setting that the mystery of Hattie Bailey would unfold, a case so deeply disturbing that even today, historians struggle to piece together the complete truth of what transpired in the months leading up to the Civil War. The first mention of Hattie Bailey appears in the municipal records of Montgomery County on March 15, 1859. According to the official documentation, she was listed as a house servant in the employment of the Whitmore family, residents of a large estate on the outskirts of the city. What makes this entry remarkable is not what it says, but what it fails to mention. Unlike other entries of the time, there is no record of purchase, no bill of sale, no indication of how Hattie Bailey came to be in the Whitmore household. The Whitmore estate occupied nearly 200 acres along the Montgomery Pike, a sprawling property that included the main house, several outbuildings, and quarters for the enslaved workers. Jeremiah Whitmore, the patriarch, was a man of considerable influence in Montgomery society. His wife, Margaret, was known for her charitable works among the white families of the community. They had 3 adult children: Thomas, who managed the cotton operations; Elizabeth, who had married into a prominent Mobile family; and Samuel, the youngest, who had recently returned from his studies in Virginia. Contemporary accounts describe the Whitmore household as unusually quiet for a property of its size. Unlike neighboring plantations, where the sounds of daily life carried across the fields, visitors often remarked on the oppressive silence that seemed to hang over the estate like morning fog. The overseer, a man named Cyrus Webb, kept meticulous records of crop yields and field work, but his journals, discovered decades later, contain numerous gaps and unexplained absences in his documentation. Hattie Bailey herself remains largely invisible in the official records until the summer of 1859. Church records from the First Presbyterian Church of Montgomery, where the Whitmore family worshipped, include a curious notation from Reverend Jonathan Mills, dated June 22nd. The entry reads, "Spoke with Mrs. Whitmore regarding the new arrival. Expressed concerns about proper Christian instruction. Matter requires delicate handling." The Reverend's personal diary, found in the church archives during renovations in 1963, provides additional context. Mills wrote extensively about his unease with what he termed the arrangement at the Whitmore place. He noted that during his visits to the estate, he had encountered a young woman whose demeanor struck him as unusual. "She carries herself with an education that seems inconsistent with her station," Mills observed. When spoken to directly, her responses suggest a familiarity with literature and scripture that raises questions about her background. As summer turned to autumn in 1859, the first signs of trouble began to surface. Dr. Nathaniel Foster, the physician who served the prominent families of Montgomery, made several unscheduled visits to the Whitmore estate during September and October. His medical records, preserved in the Montgomery Historical Society, show payments from Jeremiah Whitmore for consultation services, but provide no details about the nature of the medical attention required. More telling are the entries in Dr. Foster's personal journal. On September 14th, he wrote, "Called to Whitmore Place again. The situation grows more concerning with each visit. Mrs. Whitmore insists on my discretion, but I fear I am being asked to participate in something that goes against my medical oath. The young woman in question appears to be suffering from more than physical ailments. The physician's notes become increasingly cryptic through October. He references irregular sleeping patterns, episodes of distress, and symptoms that suggest trauma rather than illness. In one particularly revealing entry dated October 29th, Foster wrote, "I have advised the family that my services are no longer appropriate for this situation. Some conditions require more than medical intervention. I have recommended they seek guidance from others more equipped to handle matters of this nature." It was during this same period that neighbors began to notice changes at the Whitmore estate. The Hartwell family, whose property bordered the Whitmore land to the east, reported hearing sounds during the night hours that they found disturbing. In a letter to her sister in Mobile, dated November 3, 1859, Mary Hartwell wrote, "The nights here have become quite unsettling. There are voices carrying across from the Whitmore place at all hours, but they do not sound like the usual activities one might expect. James has spoken to Jeremiah about it, but he dismisses our concerns with explanations that seem insufficient." The Hartwell family's concerns were shared by other neighbors, though few were willing to address the matter directly with the Whitmores. The social hierarchy of antebellum Montgomery meant that questioning the affairs of a family of such prominence required considerable delicacy. Instead, whispered conversations took place in parlors and after church services, creating an undercurrent of unease that seemed to spread through the community. Thomas Whitmore's role in the household became a subject of particular interest during this period. Unlike his father, who maintained the dignified reserve expected of his position, Thomas displayed an intensity that neighbors found concerning. The young man had developed a reputation for spending long hours in the estate's various outbuildings, particularly a structure that had been converted from a tobacco-curing barn into what he called his private study. Local craftsman Benjamin Sharp, who had been hired to make repairs to several buildings on the property, left an account of his work at the Whitmore estate in a letter to his brother in Tennessee. Dated November 15, 1859, Sharp wrote, "The younger Whitmore son has peculiar ideas about the modifications he once made to that old barn. He's had me install additional rooms and what he calls secure storage areas. The whole thing has a feel to it that makes a man uncomfortable. I've finished the work he requested, but I won't be returning to that place." Meanwhile, Hattie Bailey's presence on the estate became increasingly noted by those who had occasion to visit. Unlike other enslaved individuals on the property, who went about their duties with the invisibility that the system demanded, Hattie seemed to occupy a position that defied easy categorization. She was observed in areas of the main house typically reserved for family members, yet she was clearly not free to come and go as she pleased. A traveling merchant named William Crawford, who made regular stops at plantations throughout the Montgomery area, included observations about the Whitmore estate in his business correspondence. In a letter to his business partner, dated December 1, 1859, Crawford noted, "The Whitmore place has always been a reliable customer, but something has changed there. There's a tension in the household that wasn't present during my previous visits. The woman they have working in the house appears to be under some form of surveillance that goes beyond the usual oversight. Young Thomas follows her movements constantly, and she seems perpetually anxious." And December brought an incident that would mark the beginning of the end for whatever arrangement the Whitmore family had established. On December 10th, a fire broke out in one of the estate's storage buildings. The Montgomery Fire Company responded, along with neighbors who came to assist in containing the blaze. During the confusion, several people reported seeing Hattie Bailey in what appeared to be an attempt to flee the property. Fire Chief Marcus Thompson's official report describes the incident in clinical terms, noting the building was a total loss, but that no injuries occurred. However, Thompson's personal notes found among his papers after his death in 1892 tell a different story. He wrote, The fire appeared to have been set deliberately, though proving such a thing would be difficult. More concerning was the behavior of the family during the emergency. They seemed more focused on ensuring that certain individuals remained accounted for than in addressing the immediate danger. The aftermath of the fire brought increased scrutiny to the Whitmore estate. Insurance investigators visited the property to assess the damage and determine the cause of the blaze. Their presence provided an opportunity for closer observation of the household dynamics that had previously remained hidden from outside view. Insurance agent Robert Hayes documented his findings in a report dated December 22, 1859. While the official determination was that the fire resulted from unknown causes, Hayes's private correspondence reveals his suspicions. In a letter to his supervisor, he wrote, "I have handled many investigations of this nature, but I have never encountered a situation where the family seemed so reluctant to provide basic information about their property and its occupants." There are aspects of this case that suggest the fire may have been the least concerning event to occur on this estate. As 1859 drew to a close, the situation at the Whitmore estate reached a critical point. Margaret Whitmore, who had maintained her social obligations throughout the autumn, began declining invitations and withdrawing from her usual activities. Friends attributed this to the stress of the fire and its aftermath, but those closest to the family sensed deeper concerns. Sarah Patterson, Margaret Whitmore's closest confidant, left an account of her final conversation with her friend in a diary entry dated January 5, 1860. Patterson wrote, "Margaret spoke in riddles about responsibilities and consequences. She mentioned having been forced to make decisions that went against her nature, and she seemed consumed by guilt over something she could not bring herself to describe directly. When I pressed her for details, she simply said that some secrets were too dangerous to share. The winter months of 1860 brought a series of events that would forever change the Whitmore family's standing in Montgomery society. Samuel Whitmore, the youngest son, had been spending increasing amounts of time away from the estate, often remaining in town for weeks at a time. His absence created additional strain within the household, particularly for his brother Thomas, who seemed to bear the weight of managing whatever situation had developed. In February 1860, Dr. Foster received an urgent summons to return to the Whitmore estate. Despite his earlier decision to discontinue his services to the family, the nature of the emergency convinced him to make one final visit. His account of that night, recorded in a journal entry dated February 16th, provides one of the few detailed glimpses into the crisis that had been building for months. Foster wrote, "I arrived at the estate to find the household in complete disarray. Margaret was in a state of near collapse, and Jeremiah appeared to have aged years in the months since I had last seen him. They led me to a room I had never entered before, located in the basement of the main house. What I witnessed there convinced me that I was dealing with a situation that exceeded my abilities as a physician." The doctor's description of his findings remains deliberately vague, but his emotional response is clear. He refers to evidence of systematic mistreatment and conditions that he found inconsistent with any legitimate household arrangement. Most significantly, he notes that Hattie Bailey was no longer present on the property, though he provides no explanation for her absence. Following his visit, Dr. Foster took an unprecedented step. He arranged a meeting with Judge Henry Morrison, one of Montgomery's most respected legal authorities, to discuss his concerns about the situation at the Whitmore estate. The judge's appointment calendar, preserved in the county courthouse records, shows a private meeting scheduled for February 22, 1860. No official record exists of what transpired during that meeting, but Judge Morrison's subsequent actions suggest that Dr. Foster's concerns were taken seriously. Within days of their conversation, Morrison arranged for a discreet inquiry into the Whitmore family's affairs. The investigation would be conducted through informal channels, avoiding the publicity that formal legal proceedings would have generated. The inquiry, led by Sheriff Daniel Mackenzie, began with a review of county records related to the Whitmore estate. Mackenzie's deputies examined property transfers, tax records, and any legal documents associated with the family's business dealings. What they discovered raised additional questions about the source of Hattie Bailey's presence on the property. Sheriff Mackenzie's report, filed in the county records office but never made public, reveals that there was no legitimate documentation for Hattie Bailey's status as an enslaved person. No bill of sale could be located, no transfer documents existed, and there was no record of inheritance that would explain her presence on the estate. In the context of 1860 Alabama, this absence of documentation suggested that her situation was irregular at best and potentially criminal at worst. As the investigation continued, it became apparent that the Whitmore family had been anticipating scrutiny of their affairs. Thomas Whitmore had spent considerable time destroying documents and removing evidence from the estate's various buildings. When Sheriff Mackenzie's deputies arrived to conduct their official inquiry, they found that many of the structures had been thoroughly cleaned and emptied of any materials that might have provided insight into recent events. The barn that had been converted into Thomas's private study was of particular interest to the investigators. Craftsman Benjamin Sharp was interviewed about the modifications he had made to the building, and his description of the interior spaces suggested they had been designed for purposes that went beyond scholarly pursuits. However, when deputies examined the structure, they found it completely bare, with no evidence of how it had been used. Margaret Whitmore's withdrawal from social activities had become complete by March 1860. Friends who attempted to visit the estate were turned away with explanations of illness, but no physician could be found who was currently treating her. The isolation that had always characterized the Whitmore property intensified, creating an atmosphere of suspicion that extended throughout the Montgomery community. During this period, Samuel Whitmore made a decision that would have lasting consequences for his family. Unable to continue living with the knowledge of what had transpired at the estate, he approached Reverend Mills at the First Presbyterian Church and requested a private meeting to discuss matters of conscience. Reverend Mills's diary entry for March 28, 1860, records his conversation with Samuel Whitmore in detail. The young man confessed to having witnessed events at the family estate that he described as abominations against God and man. While Mills does not provide specific details of Samuel's revelations, he notes that the confession left him with knowledge that created a moral crisis about his obligations as both a minister and a citizen. The Reverend struggled with how to respond to Samuel's confession. His subsequent diary entries reflect his anguish over whether to maintain the confidentiality of the confessional or to act on information that suggested serious crimes had been committed. The internal conflict he experienced is evident in his writing, which becomes increasingly agitated and difficult to decipher during the first weeks of April 1860. On April 15, 1860, Reverend Mills made the decision that would bring the Whitmore family's secrets into the open. He arranged a meeting with Sheriff Mackenzie to discuss what he termed matters of urgent moral concern. While the specific details of their conversation are not recorded, the meeting prompted Mackenzie to intensify his investigation and to seek additional legal authority for his inquiry. The sheriff's expanded investigation included interviews with current and former workers on the Whitmore estate. Many of the enslaved individuals who had worked the property had been sold or transferred to other plantations in the months preceding the inquiry, but several remained in the Montgomery area and were willing to provide testimony about conditions on the estate. The accounts gathered by Sheriff Mackenzie painted a picture of systematic intimidation and control that extended far beyond the normal boundaries of the slave system. Workers described an atmosphere of fear that pervaded the property, with particular attention paid to preventing any contact between Hattie Bailey and the outside world. Several witnesses reported that she had been confined to specific areas of the main house and that her movements were constantly monitored. More disturbing were reports of regular visits to the converted barn, where witnesses observed Hattie Bailey being taken under circumstances that suggested she was not there voluntarily. The purpose of these visits remained unclear, but the emotional state in which she returned to the main house indicated that whatever occurred in the barn was traumatic in nature. As April progressed, pressure mounted on the Whitmore family from multiple directions. The investigation had attracted the attention of prominent community members who had previously been unaware of the situation. Social pressure, combined with the threat of formal legal proceedings, created an environment where the family's continued residence in Montgomery became increasingly untenable. On April 29, 1860, Jeremiah Whitmore made an announcement that shocked Montgomery society. The family would be leaving Alabama immediately, citing business interests that required their relocation to Texas. The sudden nature of their departure, combined with the timing relative to the ongoing investigation, suggested that their decision was not entirely voluntary. The estate was sold within days of the announcement, at a price significantly below its assessed value. The buyer, a cotton merchant from Mobile, agreed to complete the transaction quickly and with minimal inspection of the property. This haste suggested that Whitmore was more concerned with immediate departure than with maximizing the financial return on his investment. Sheriff Mackenzie attempted to prevent the family's departure pending the completion of his investigation, but legal technicalities prevented him from formally detaining them without specific charges being filed. The evidence he had gathered was compelling, but largely circumstantial, and the witnesses he had interviewed were enslaved individuals whose testimony would not have been admissible in court proceedings against white defendants. On May 7, 1860, the Whitmore family left Montgomery under cover of darkness. They took only essential possessions, leaving behind most of their furniture and personal belongings. The manner of their departure reinforced suspicions about their reasons for leaving, but it also eliminated the possibility of pursuing formal justice for whatever crimes may have been committed. The investigation continued after the family's departure, but without the principles available for questioning, progress became limited. Sheriff Mackenzie focused his efforts on determining what had become of Hattie Bailey, whose whereabouts remained unknown. The search expanded to include neighboring counties and states, but no trace of her could be found. In June 1860, workers cleaning the Whitmore estate made a discovery that provided the first concrete evidence of what had transpired on the property. Hidden beneath floorboards in the basement of the main house, they found a collection of personal items that appeared to belong to Hattie Bailey. The items included clothing, jewelry, and most significantly, a diary written in her hand. The diary, recovered by Sheriff Mackenzie, offered a first-hand account of Hattie Bailey's experiences at the Whitmore estate. The entries, which spanned several months in 1859, reveal that she was not enslaved in the traditional sense, but had been kidnapped from a northern city where she had been living as a free person. The circumstances of her abduction and the method by which she was brought to Montgomery are described in detail that confirmed the investigators' worst suspicions. According to the diary, Hattie Bailey had been born free in Philadelphia and had received an education that was unusual for African-American women of the period. She had been working as a governess for a wealthy family when she was approached by someone claiming to represent a Southern family in need of educational services. The offer seemed legitimate, and she agreed to travel south to discuss the position. The journey south became a trap when her escort, who was later revealed to be Thomas Whitmore, diverted from the planned route and brought her to the Montgomery estate against her will. Once there, she found herself trapped in a system where her free status was meaningless and her educated background made her situation even more precarious. The diary entries reveal that her captivity was not simply a matter of forced labor. Thomas Whitmore had developed an obsession with what he viewed as the contradiction between her race and her education, and he designed elaborate scenarios meant to demonstrate what he considered the futility of educating African Americans. The converted barn served as the location for these demonstrations, which involved psychological torture designed to break down her sense of self-worth and intellectual capacity. Margaret Whitmore's complicity in the situation becomes clear through the diary entries. Rather than protecting Hattie Bailey or seeking to end her son's abuse, the older woman enabled the situation by providing Thomas with the authority and resources he needed to continue his activities. The diary suggests that Margaret viewed the situation as an experiment that would prove theories about racial inferiority that were popular in pro-slavery circles. The physical evidence found with the diary supported the account of systematic abuse. Medical instruments discovered in the converted barn indicated that the psychological torture had been accompanied by procedures that were designed to cause pain and humiliation rather than to serve any legitimate medical purpose. The equipment suggested a level of premeditation and organization that made the crimes even more disturbing. Sheriff Mackenzie's investigation reached its conclusion in July 1860, but the results were never made public. The report he filed with county authorities was sealed and remained hidden in court records until it was discovered during a renovation of the courthouse in 1965. The decision to suppress the findings reflected the sensitivity of the case and concerns about how the revelation of such crimes might affect community relations during an already turbulent period. The sealed report reveals that Mackenzie had uncovered evidence of multiple crimes, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, and what would today be recognized as systematic torture. The sheriff recommended that warrants be issued for the arrest of Thomas and Margaret Whitmore, with lesser charges filed against Jeremiah for his failure to prevent or report the crimes committed on his property. However, the outbreak of the Civil War in April 1861 effectively ended any possibility of pursuing legal action against the Whitmore family. Resources that might have been devoted to tracking down the fugitives were redirected toward the war effort, and the chaos of the conflict period made it impossible to coordinate law enforcement activities across state lines. The fate of Hattie Bailey remains one of the most troubling aspects of the case. Despite extensive searches, no evidence was ever found to indicate whether she had escaped, been killed, or been transported to another location. The diary entries end abruptly in November 1859, providing no clue about what happened to her during the final months before the family's departure. Some historians have speculated that she may have died during the winter of 1859 to 1860, and that her death prompted the family's decision to flee Montgomery. Others believe that she may have been sold to a trader who transported her to the Deep South, where the absence of documentation about her free status would have made escape impossible. A few researchers have suggested that she may have successfully escaped during the confusion surrounding the fire in December 1859, and that the family's subsequent behavior reflected their fear that she would surface to testify against them. This theory is supported by the timing of their increased security measures and their growing paranoia about outside scrutiny. The Whitmore family's life in Texas remains largely undocumented. Records from the period indicate that Jeremiah Whitmore purchased land in East Texas and attempted to establish a cotton plantation, but the venture appears to have failed within a few years. Thomas Whitmore's name appears in various legal documents related to business disputes, but there is no indication that he ever faced consequences for his actions in Alabama. Margaret Whitmore died in 1864, according to cemetery records in Marshall, Texas. Her grave marker provides only basic information about her dates of birth and death, with no reference to her family or previous life in Alabama. The austere nature of her burial suggests that the family's circumstances had declined significantly during their years in exile. Samuel Whitmore's decision to break the silence about his family's crimes appears to have haunted him for the remainder of his life. Church records from various Texas communities show him moving frequently and attempting to establish himself in different locations. But he never seemed to find the peace he sought. He died in 1879, alone and largely forgotten, in a boarding house in Dallas. The Montgomery community's response to the Whitmore scandal reveals the complex social dynamics of the antebellum South. While many residents were disturbed by the allegations, there was also a reluctance to acknowledge that such crimes could occur within their social circle. The decision to suppress the investigation's findings reflected this discomfort and the desire to maintain social cohesion during a period of increasing tension. Reverend Mills continued to struggle with his knowledge of the case until his own death in 1876. His later diary entries reveal ongoing guilt about his failure to act sooner, and his regret about the suffering that might have been prevented if he had been more willing to break the bonds of confidentiality. His final entries return repeatedly to questions about the moral obligations of those who possess knowledge of evil but lack the power to stop it. Dr. Foster's experience with the Whitmore case influenced his subsequent medical practice and his involvement in post-war discussions about medical ethics. He became an advocate for clearer guidelines about physician responsibilities when treating patients in circumstances that suggest abuse or illegal activity. His writings on medical ethics, published in the 1870s, include veiled references to cases that clearly draw from his experiences at the Whitmore estate. The estate itself changed hands several times in the decades following the Civil War. Each successive owner reported strange occurrences and an atmosphere of unease that made the property difficult to inhabit. Some attributed these experiences to the traumatic events that had occurred there, while others suggested more practical explanations related to the building's construction and location. In 1897, the main house was destroyed by a fire that investigators determined had been set deliberately. No arrests were made in connection with the arson, but local residents expressed little regret about the destruction of a building that had become associated with such dark memories. The outbuildings, including the converted barn, were demolished shortly afterward. The land remained vacant for several decades until it was purchased by the city of Montgomery for use as a municipal facility. Today, the site houses a water treatment plant, and few residents are aware of its historical significance. A small historical marker, placed in 1968, acknowledges the location's connection to antebellum plantation life, but makes no reference to the crimes that occurred there. Academic interest in the Whitmore case emerged during the Civil Rights era, when historians began examining previously overlooked aspects of slavery and racial violence. Dr. Patricia Henderson of Tuskegee University published the first scholarly article about the case in 1967, based on her discovery of Sheriff Mackenzie's sealed report in the courthouse archives. Henderson's research revealed that the Whitmore case was not isolated, but part of a broader pattern of crimes against free African Americans who were kidnapped and enslaved. Her work documented similar cases in other southern states and demonstrated that the practice was more widespread than previously recognized. The research contributed to a growing understanding of the ways in which the slave system extended beyond traditional plantation boundaries. The psychological aspects of the Whitmore case have attracted attention from scholars studying the intersection of racism and sexual violence. The diary entries provide rare first-hand documentation of the methods used to dehumanize victims and the psychological impact of systematic abuse. These materials have informed modern understanding of trauma and its long-term effects on survivors. Contemporary discussions of the case often focus on the failures of the legal and social systems that allowed such crimes to occur and go unpunished. The reluctance of community members to intervene, despite growing awareness that something was wrong, reflects broader patterns of complicity that enabled systematic violence against African Americans throughout the antebellum period. The search for Hattie Bailey's final resting place continues to motivate researchers and genealogists who hope to provide closure to her story. Recent efforts have utilized DNA analysis and computerized record searches to trace possible connections, but no definitive evidence has emerged about her ultimate fate. The absence of resolution serves as a reminder of the countless individuals whose stories remain hidden in the gaps of historical documentation. In 2010, the Montgomery Historical Society established a memorial fund to support research into cases of racial violence that had been suppressed or forgotten. The Hattie Bailey Research Project, funded through this initiative, has collected oral histories and family documents that provide additional context about the social conditions that made such crimes possible. The project has also worked to identify other potential victims of similar crimes, using the Whitmore case as a model for understanding the methods used to kidnap and enslave free African Americans. This research has revealed evidence of organized networks that facilitated such activities, suggesting that the Whitmore family's actions were part of a larger criminal enterprise. Modern legal experts who have reviewed the evidence from the Whitmore case note that many of the crimes committed would be prosecutable under current federal hate crime statutes and human trafficking laws. The systematic nature of the abuse and its racial motivation would likely result in severe penalties under contemporary legal standards. The case continues to serve as an educational tool for understanding the complexity of racial violence in American history. Universities throughout the South include the Whitmore case in courses about slavery, civil rights, and criminal justice, using it to illustrate how legal and social systems can fail to protect vulnerable populations. The lasting impact of the Whitmore case extends beyond its historical significance to its influence on contemporary discussions about justice and accountability. The failure to prosecute the perpetrators serves as a reminder of the importance of pursuing justice even when it is difficult or politically inconvenient. The case demonstrates how allowing crimes to go unpunished can perpetuate cycles of violence and injustice.